countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, it is now time for more of the Last Comic Shop podcast.
That's right. We are opening up the shop to newbies to help them find their way underneath this giant comic book tent.
And we're keeping the lights on for the oldies, and actually we have a comic creator that has stumbled into the shop this week, and so we're going to talk with him about some of our favorite franchises and being one of those guys in charge of licensed books and what that means and the power that goes along with it.
I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson, and that was just Chad Smith, one of my loyal co-hosts, as well as J.A. Scott. And if you're wondering who has stumbled into the Last Comic Shop this week, that would be Paul Allor. Yay! You get the full Kermit the Frog treatment, Paul. Thank you so much for stopping by the Last Comic Shop this week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And I should ask, because I'm bad at this as a comic book fan. It is Allor, right? Not Allor or...
It is Allor, yeah, which is one of the more boring of the possible pronunciations, so I tend to not correct people. I just let them live their lives. That's backfired on me a couple times. Years ago, when I lived in a different city and had a day job, a friend of mine heard me introduce myself to someone as Paul Allor, and she was like, wait, it's not Allor? And I'm like, no, it's not. She's like, I've always said Allor and you've never corrected me. I'm like, yeah, I know, I don't. She says, no, you don't understand. I have heard people say Allor, and I've been like, he happens to be a good friend of mine, and it's pronounced Allor. I'm sorry you were doing that.
There you go. You're too kind to correct her. There you go.
Can I tell you another fun story about that same person that is comics related?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Is that when I got my first Ninja Turtles job, and I told her that I was coming out with a Ninja Turtles comic, she looked really concerned, and she was like, just be careful how public you are about that, because those copyright owners can be really particular, and they might come down on you. And I was like, no, it's not a fan comic. I'm actually writing a Ninja Turtles comic. And like, it took a bit to get her to believe. I think she still was like thinking that I just didn't know what I was talking about, but it was
That is awesome. Well, that's actually one of the first things I want to talk to you about. Is I know you primarily through your licensed work, and we actually met a few weeks back. You were doing a comic store signing, and I got to tell you this story about the first time I stumbled onto Paul Allor work was during the pandemic. At that point in time, comics had stopped coming out, and for reasons that are complicated, I'm sure, my comic shop did not close its doors. Instead, they stayed open while they were not supposed to stay open. and it became like a comic book speakeasy. You know, politics aside, I felt safe enough there, and I thought it was cool that it's like getting whiskey during Prohibition, but instead, it's comic books.
I mean, did they stay open even when there were no weekly comics?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would go each week, regardless for my Wednesday appointment, and I'd look around and be like, I got to buy something. And so one week it was Deceased. It had come out the previous year. I found all the back issues of that. I'm like, hey, that's really awesome. And then one week I turned around and I saw the cover to G.I. Joe number 4. And it was like a Time magazine style cover with Cobra Commander on it, the man of the year.
Yeah.
A lapsed Joe fan where like, I love the Hama stuff, but I had fallen off with some of the IDW things. Like, I'll pick that up. They had all the issues. And lo and behold, it was real good. And not only that, it was going to get a lot better. And so, like, from that point forward, I was like, I'm a fan of this Paul Allor guy.
Was number 4 the most recent? I feel like we got to number 4 before we went on hiatus because of COVID. Is that
yes.
correct?
So it was probably the most recent one there. And there was nothing new. They did have the previous issues, so that was my stack for the week. I got 4 G.I. Joe comics and came back and read it. That was actually what I wanted to talk to you about first and foremost, is working on a property like that, like G.I. Joe, because your G.I. Joe was not the traditional take. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, you are correct. It's kind of a weird, like, interregnum before, the Skybound got the license and it became very much more traditional. But Hasbro in particular, and I think IDW as well, wanted to do something new with the license. So when they brought me on board, we actually talked about a couple different ideas, and I did, as I recall, like a couple pitches. So what they ended up coming up with was basically this idea that they wanted it to be a less military focused, that was more about like the OSS in World War II, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the first intelligence agency of the United States, and it basically brought in a lot of civilians to go behind the lines and do spycraft work. And they also wanted to have Cobra be in more of a position of power to basically, like, justify the idea of this spycraft.
Yeah, it starts off with Cobra's One. They've taken over. Like,
Yeah,
I read that. I was like, what?
Cobra provides.
Cobra provides. And they didn't, I don't think Hasbro necessarily knew I was going to go that far with it. Like, I think they expected me to have, like, Cobra be, like, an impressive force, but I was like, if we're going to do this, let's just go all the way and have, have these guys be back on their heels and have, the G.I. Joes be the revolution with what Cobra has won. So yeah, the first issue ends with the United States surrendering to Cobra, and, Cobra installing itself in the White House essentially, and, making Chicago their U.S. headquarters. And yeah, like it was this idea that, most of the characters did not have a strong military background. They were just civilians who were brought in to do this spycraft. And yeah, that allowed us to really explore some interesting things. And honestly, like I was kind of like, I'm being, given this amazing opportunity, but I'm like, but I can't do like all the stuff that I think a lot of fans are going to be looking for. They didn't want me to use the uniforms. They didn't want me to use vehicles, which I was like, are you kidding me? Really?
Oh, that stinks.
We got to use bats, but like I had to fight for the bats. And I love the folks at High.
Really?
I mean, they're fantastic. I had a great time working with them. So none of this is like meant to be complaining. It's just more like a little peek behind the curtain. They thought the bats were a little bit too sci-fi. They also wanted to get away from the sci-fi elements. So I basically got the bats in by making the argument that like, no, the military is using robots right now. Like, it's not sci-fi. It's very real. So that's why the bats in our book do not look like the traditional bats. They look more like the robots that we see, coming out of, these different places.
Right. So there's a couple things that you mentioned. You mentioned that you weren't able to play with some of the toys. For me, at least, there were two toys that were kind of left off the table, which for me actually was kind of like a feature, not a bug. Some fans might have considered it like, they didn't include Duke or Snake Eyes. Like Duke is eliminated in the first issue. You don't see Snake Eyes until the last. It's out there. People can read it. But long story short, Duke and Snake Eyes are off the table. So my first question was that your idea to take them off the table, or was it Hasbro's? Because for me, it was brilliant because it allowed other characters to breathe. So often, Duke and Snake Eyes, they can take up the whole room, especially Snake Eyes. Like, people are just waiting for Snake Eyes to pop on the screen and, all right, there you go. Hey, it's a Snake Eyes book. But without them, then you were able to focus on other characters, which, again, if you want something different, that was awesome.
That was very much my take, both of those. I wanted to kill one of the major characters very early on, just to, like, give you the idea that this is not your traditional G.I. Joe book. There's one issue where like we kill off like 10 characters the first time.
Oh yeah, the Tunnel Rat issue, man. Everybody hates Duke. You axe Duke issue 1. Jeez Louise, it's like the movie all over again.
Yes, I got a lot of that. So I did want to do that, and Duke seemed to make the most sense for a lot of reasons, like because I knew Scarlet was going to be a major character, and I didn't want to. We killed a major character. Ha ha ha! Aren't we edgy? Moving on now. Like the entire rest of the run deals with Scarlet's grief and the fallout from that.
Wanted to ask you about that issue number 7. Like Scarlet throughout is going through things, but it's such a poignant issue where you have Scarlet dealing with all the PTSD and the way you guys use comics. You and help me out with the pronunciation. Is it Chris Evenhuis?
I think Evenhuis. He's one of my closest friends in the world, and I don't know for sure.
Okay, but no, we'll just call him Chris. Chris does a great job visualizing Scarlet trying to throw the garbage away and like just suspecting around every corner that there's going to be something, and the mental toll that it's taken. It's powerful stuff. That whole issue about her losing her friends and the support groups and everything else. This is G.I. Joe, man.
Right.
Why?
Paul, there's that conversation that happens in the support group where the one guy is like, oh, I came back from the war, and all of a sudden they've got like 15, flavors of Coke, and like, how am I supposed to react to that? Like, how am I supposed to normalize that? I was just trying to survive, and now all of a sudden I'm supposed to drink 15 kinds of Coke. It felt so real. Where did that come from? Like, because it was so powerful. It was so realistic. It felt like something that you would have heard in our true support group nowadays. Like, it really did.
Part of it was just more broadly and generally. Part of it was growing up in a military family where both my dad and my stepdad were career Air Force enlisted men. The PTSD stuff in particular, and like a lot of treatment, it's a lot of research. I knew I wouldn't do this issue from like when I was first developing the series. So before issue 1, I knew issue 7 was coming. And because of we had the book on pause for several months because of COVID, that gave me more time. And I just really dug in deep, and just not just like academic research, but like reading like treatment plans and reading oral histories and interviews with soldiers with PTSD, and also had a couple of great consultants, Dwayne France, who is both a combat veteran and a therapist who works with the veteran population, and a couple folks from the Veterans Affairs who read through the early scripts and gave me a lot of wonderful advice. And I would like not to brag, like, yeah, I am bragging. Deal with it. Not you guys, but the listeners at home. They all told me, they were like, this is the only time that we've seen this sort of treatment, and just PTSD in general, like depicted realistically, and not just in comics, but like in fiction. And I was extraordinarily proud of that. It really was just a massive amount of research put into this, 20-page comic that takes place over like months and months and months of time in a very compressed format. It was a challenge. One of the hardest things I've ever written. I am incredibly proud of it. And yeah, like you said, it's a 5-spec issue, so we killed off Duke in the first issue, but he's a major part of this issue. And when people were like, how can you have killed off Duke? I would tell them, like, you're going to see Duke again, and I think you're going to be happy with, like, I really feel like, even though we killed him off in the first issue, we did like one of the real great Duke stories, him and Scarlet. Yeah. I think we captured his character really well.
To come out of a G.I. Joe comic, it's both shocking and wonderful, and like for folks that this may have slid under the radar just because for issue 7 alone, that makes it's very much so worth exposing more and more people to this. So great job. You deserve all the accolades, sir.
Oh yeah, absolutely. For that issue, for the Dreadnoks issue. The Dreadnoks issue is
with Grandpa.
That's amazing. This tragedy that happened in Indianapolis. That it was raw. It was brutal, but it was so good. I just want to say that like this is real. What real war is like. Like these are real stakes. This isn't like blue and red lasers. This is like true stakes of what you would need to do even more nowadays, especially with like what we see with like robots and some of the talk about robots, how, the bats, it was terrifying. This is actually, I think, even more poignant now than it was 5 years ago, which kudos to you for writing something that is actually getting better with time.
And a lot of that really was Hasbro as well. I should say that I was all about like that brutality and that realism. If they had said, no, you can't do that, I couldn't have done it. And they were so supportive of it. In the first issue, Roadblock like shoots a Viper in the face very close up. And
then feels it.
And that was a Hasbro note where they were like, can we have him do this like in the first issue so that, the readers know what to expect? And I was like, yeah, okay. And like I caught a lot of flack also for like Roadblock's his reaction to it, because again, he's not from a military background. He's really shook by the fact he just killed a person for the first time, as anyone would be. And a lot of the old school G.I. Joe fans are like, that's not Roadblock. And I'm like, that was a Hasbro note. I had him being much more taking it in stride. But like 5 years later, I'm like, they were right. You know what I mean? Like at the time, I was like, oh man, I'm gonna get so much flack for that. And that's not really how I was picturing him either. But like, no, it would have been unrealistic to have him be like, I just killed someone and I don't care. You know what I mean? He becomes the Roadblock we know and love over the course of 12 issues.
That's right. The final issue with him standing on top of the van holding the gun that like a normal human isn't going to be able to hold. But that's Roadblock there. Yeah. All right. But all right, we could dominate this whole thing with G.I. Joe talk, and there's a part of me that wants to, but I have two last questions.
Okay.
One, so as far as G.I. Joe goes, were there any toys you didn't get to play with that you really wanted to? Like any characters that...
The book was intended as an ongoing. So that's again, it got basically canceled after 12 issues. The ratings did like much better than they were expecting, but still, like at that time, it really took something like the Skybound effort to get these books, back in the sales ratings. But yes, no, it's a tough question to answer because I had massive plans. I mean, I had so many plans for where things were going after this. I mean, you mentioned that, yeah, Snake Eyes shows up in one page at the end of issue 6, I believe it is. Again, there's a Hasbro, which I think was a good note, that I was going to bring him more into the second arc, into like issues 7 through 12. And Hasbro was like, now that we've teased him, let's hold him back until the third arc. Which, like, now I'm like, I didn't get to write more Snake Eyes. But I think like had the book kept going, that would have been a really good decision. You know what I mean? That kind of slow boil.
Yeah.
I would say, though, the characters that I regret the most are the October Guard. The October Guard, where they were going to be, much more of an ally than they have been traditionally.
Okay.
Do the same thing that G.I. Joe is doing. They're going to be fighting Cobra in Russia.
Even the Larry Hama October Guard, when you first introduced them, like, they were allies. Like, they were adversarial, but
absolutely, yeah.
There's a history there.
Frenemies at times.
They were more noble.
There's a lot of stuff that Hama did that I kind of wanted to play off of and do our own version of it. Vance Wingfield. I had a really cool story planned for Vance Wingfield. And,
that's a deep pull.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes,
I think I know who that is. Who is that?
Sort of like a cult leader, sort of like an unhinged military commander of a militia group in Montana from some of the very early Hama comics. And I was gonna use him to play with the idea when G.I. Joe was looking for allies, like how batshit crazy of people do they want to ally with?
The nutbags that are going to sign up, be like, yeah,
right,
me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, how far are you willing to go in some ways to find support for your
a similar thing with that. I doubt I would have been allowed to do this. I don't know if these characters were even on the table for me, but I wanted to bring in Red Shadows. And
the British.
I imagined ending an arc with the Joes talking about how they need more allies. And then you see Red Shadows blowing up a Cobra installation and shouting, "Blood for the Barons!" And the question for the next arc is like, are they going to ally with Red Shadows? Like and the eventual answer would have been no. Like they would turn down the tactical advantage to not work with like just straightforward terrorists. But I had plans.
There you go. Man. All right, but our last Joe question.
Wait too much about this. I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. Dude, I'm loving it. But G.I. Joe, synonymous with toys. You got to add some toys to the toy box. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you feel about your additions? With Tiger, with Fade Away, what's your take on the things you got to add to the Joe mythos? Because everybody knows and respects the Hamaverse and everything, but to be able to add to that is something special.
I'm really proud of them, yeah. And I'm guessing that, like, you probably won't see most of them again. I don't think Skybound's going to be doing like a Fade Away mini or anything. Maybe
it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, Tiger, Fade Away, Frontier, who became a character because they said no, you can't make Pakistani, and I said okay. No, I'll just give him a different name and make him Pakistani Flint anyway.
There you go.
On the Cobra side too, Demon I think was a really fun addition where she was like more like a business-minded Cobra operative.
She answers all my mistaken emails. The mailer demon lady.
You're the worst.
Yeah, exactly her.
The worst. Can you say I have bad dad jokes?
I know. Okay.
If you do want to read my G.I. Joe run, the trade edition is collected as G.I. Joe World on Fire. So that's what you want to look for in your comic shop. Because the licensing changed, I don't know how readily available it is anymore, but you should at least be able to find a used copy of it pretty easily.
Very cool. But we keep going back to licensed books. And I know Andy and Jay and I have this thing where licensed books so often are people's first in when it comes to comic books, right? And so it's an incredibly important job. But at the same time, oftentimes you have corporate interests breathing down your neck one way. And for a lot of folks, it's very easy to just check the boxes and tell the stories. But to do that and tell stories that are super compelling, it just makes it that much more impressive. So we've talked a lot about Joe, but you've done a ton of work with Ninja Turtles as well. I know I picked up recently Mutant Nation 5 on your recommendation, as you were able to introduce an important element to the Turtles mythos. Do you want to tell us about Pepperoni?
Well, Pepperoni has been around for several years. Sophie Campbell and I co-created Pepperoni in Turtles in Time issue #1.
Okay.
Holy cow, 2014, so 11 years ago.
Wow.
Time, it does fly.
It does, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it should be that long ago, but yeah.
Yeah, so Pepperoni is a character that they met when they were transported back in time to prehistoric days. And they weren't able to bring Pepperoni back in that issue, unfortunately, because that was the first of 4 Turtles in Time issues, and I was co-writing with another person. I didn't want to have them be like, hey, I'm introduced this new character, now you have to have this dinosaur coming along with them in all your adventures too, you know what I mean? But thankfully, they were able to follow up, and I think in the Bebop and Rocksteady miniseries, went back in time again and were able to bring Pepperoni home with them this time. So since then, Pepperoni has been Raphael's pet baby dinosaur. They have hung out together quite a bit. You see her a lot in the background, especially with Sophie wrote Ninja Turtles 101 through 150. So, obviously, we both have an extraordinary amount of affection for the character. So IDW asked me if I want to do a one-shot for the Mutant Nation series, and they offered me a couple different options. Here are some characters you can, and when they mentioned Pepperoni, I was like, yeah, let's do Pepperoni. Yes.
Done and done. Yeah, no, I read it. I really enjoyed it. Continuing on the license tip, you are now writing one of the hottest properties at Marvel Comics. I have a 13-year-old where
Nice.
I have a basement full of comic books and comic book paraphernalia he could care less about. But the thing that you're writing is the thing where he's like, yes, Dad, I want that. Get that for me. And I'm sure he's not alone. You're writing Marvel Rivals. Can you talk about that? Because I read this issue and it is bonkers. But how did you get involved? What's going on with Marvel Rivals?
Marvel just dropped me an email several months before the game came out. Hey, we're putting together this comic for Marvel Unlimited to tie into the Marvel Rivals game. Are you interested in writing it? And I shouldn't say this, but I think I got the job because they needed it done fairly quickly. And I have a reputation in the comics industry as being someone who can do that.
Availability is sometimes the best ability.
Yes, and so really exploding, and I got to just keep riding that wave. But yeah, the comic you were mentioning, it collects the first 6 online issues, and then they put that into print. And the second issue of Marvel Rivals has been solicited for August, so you can order that from your comic shop now as well.
Yeah, the game itself is a phenomenon. It's
it's incredible.
What all the kids are all about, and so. Have you been getting a lot of reaction from fans that might not normally pick up comic books, or what's it like?
It's been an interesting mix of fans who don't normally pick up comic books, and also a lot of really die-hard Marvel fans are into it as well. So it's been a fun range of reactions. And when I've done cons and signings with it, oftentimes when people see Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Samurai Jack, Power Rangers, a lot of other stuff I've done on the table, it'll catch their eye and they'll stop and look, but nothing like when people see that Marvel Rivals logo on my table. There are people who you just I've done some signings where they've put me outside the store. I've done I did one in the mall where I was in the mall thoroughfare right outside the store, and just people going on their way to Hot Topic who are Marvel Rivals. They end up buying every cover. So yeah, absolutely. It's been amazing. Because the game is pretty bonkers. You know what I mean? The game is pretty
bonkers.
Yeah. And the game is very much based on the fighting with a very loose story to connect it. And so it's been fun taking that loose story and being all right, what can I do with this to make it, and they've really let me have a lot of fun with it, make it very funny. There's a lot of humor in it, a lot of good like sight gags, and yeah, they've been very supportive of that.
Heck yeah. No, I'm a Squirrel Girl fan, and you did great with her. Jeff the Land Shark, I didn't know as much, but like now I do, so I know what the heck my son's talking about.
Those characters in particular, I think you're gonna get a kick out of what we do with them in the
nice
second arc. Yeah, we have a lot of fun with them.
Kudos to you, Paul, because to be honest, as Chad mentioned before, oftentimes licensed comic books are folks' gateway into the larger world of comic books. And as the Last Comic Shop, it has a mission to get folks reading comic books. Thank you. Thank you for taking licensed properties in some ways and putting your unique, wonderful stamp on them, putting them out there and saying, like, you know what? This isn't just a Marvel Rivals tie-in comic book. This is a good comic book. Again, we're really, really big fans of your work.
Yeah, thanks for not screwing it up. Is basically what we're saying.
I mean, I also teach comics writing classes. One of the classes I teach is about specifically about writing licensed comics. And I talk very much about, like, I don't say here's how not screw it up, but I talk a lot about how not to really looking at the core of the character and what the appeal is to the fans. Like, you can change other things, but you can't change that, you know.
Now I can get a word in because I don't have as much of the fandom of G.I. Joe the way Chad does.
Right.
So
Sorry.
But you had mentioned that you teach writing. Where do you teach writing?
I teach writing through a company called Comics Experience, founded and run by Andy Schmidt, who used to be an editor at Marvel and IDW, and he's currently the editor-in-chief at Boom Studios. I've also done a lot of classes in person at like schools and summer camps, like not through Comics Experience, but yeah, my creator-owned book Hollow Heart won the Indiana Author Awards a few years ago, and through that I had a lot of grant opportunities to where they sent me to several schools and libraries to teach and speak, and that was a really wonderful experience as well. So yeah.
Oh, very cool. Now, are these online classes, can anyone sign up for them, or is it like only at certain times of the year?
We do two kinds. We do like live classes where it is only at certain times of years, and where I, do the class live every like Tuesday or Wednesday night for 6 weeks. But then we also have self-guided classes. It's the same content though, where it is just recordings that you go through at your own pace.
Oh, very cool. And where can people find that if they're interested?
comicsexperience.com. I teach, I think, 6 or 7 classes. Only like one of them is available digitally so far, but I've actually been recording more of them this very week, so they should be more coming up soon. Like sort of the 101 class I teach, Introduction to Comics Writing, is a class that I took 14 years ago from Andy, so it's been fun.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Have you met anyone that took your class and is now in the industry?
Yeah.
So you have like a little coach's tree.
But yeah, no, there's definitely a few names you recognize, and a lot of people who are really rocking it, just doing like kickstarting their own comics, making their way in. Yeah, no,
That's so great. That must feel so fulfilling to see that.
Yeah, I've taught like a couple hundred people at this point. I about a year ago, I sat down and like figured it out and like add them all up, and yeah, and it's wonderful. And I'm friends with all of my former students. I see them at cons and shows, and it's always fantastic. I always tell my students, like, once you've taken a class from me, feel free to like hit me up anytime, talk, or just need advice or want me to look at anything. So yeah, it's been great.
We're getting pearls of wisdom here too. That's exciting.
Well, one other thing that's exciting is the fact that not only is Paul a wonderful comic book writer, they also are a great comic book fan. And they picked out a really great book for us to read this week. That is Hey Wait by Jason. And we'll have that right after these commercial breaks. So stay tuned for more of The Last Comic Shop right after this.
Hey, it's Mikey Wood, frequent Last Comic Shop guest and collector. And as a collector, I'm always in need of boards, bags, long boxes, and more to house all those comics. That's why I use promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off my orders at bcwsupplies.com. Not only does it get me a discount on BCW's already low prices, but I know using LCSPOD at checkout is another way I can show my support to the Last Comic Shop podcast and their continuing mission to bring fans together under that big comic book tent. So if you're in need of comic book supplies, head out to bcwsupplies.com and use promo code LCSPOD today. That's LCSPOD.
Dakota Brown here, creator of the CBR Comic Crown award-winning Death Comes for the Toymaker, here to tell you about my upcoming comic series, Something Beyond the Petrichor. Created alongside artist and horror indie comic star David Lujan, Something Beyond the Petrichor tells the story of a young woman named Jocelyn, her talking stuffed turtle, and a Bible-Belt cryptid who journey through a wasteland devastated by acid rain to search for any remnants of society that might be out there. The first issue of the 4-issue series will be available in stores June 4th. Be sure to tell your local comic shop that you want a copy.
All right, working with more of the last comic shop. It is now time for our Read Pile Review. Yes, the time of every single show where we have folks that stop by the last comic shop and they're like, hey, this is a book you guys should read. And we're like, oh, okay, we will read that. Because I have read books by Jason before. I really have. Let's Kill Hitler or I Killed Adolf Hitler. There you go. I think there's a Doctor Who episode called Let's Kill Hitler. In any case, the book this week is called Hey Wait. It's by Jason. And J.A., why don't you give us a little bit of background behind this Jason guy?
Yes, I was going to say who the author is, but you already said who the author was. It's Jason is a Norwegian cartoonist. Hey Wait was actually his first graphic novella that was translated into English. Obviously, all of his works were first in Norwegian. But now, since then, this was released in English in 2001. It came out, I believe, in 1998 in Norway. Since then, as you mentioned, Andrew, he's put out a lot of books that have also been translated into English, including Pocket Full of Rain, Werewolves of Montpelier, The Left Bank Gang, Why Are You Doing This, Low Moon, just to name a few. So very good cartoonist, and this is a Harvey Award-winning book, Hey Wait.
Oh, Paul, would you happen to give us the 10-cent synopsis for what happens in this particular book?
Boy, did I pick an easy book to recap for the 10-cent synopsis. So Hey Wait is it's in black and white, as most of Jason's books are. Like very, like I would say, deceptively simple illustrations, actually not remotely simple at all. And it's just this gorgeous book about life and death, which sounds so ridiculously broad, but and about trauma and time and how we carry our trauma and our regrets and our experiences with us throughout our lives and how they shape us and how they slowly destroy us. And that doesn't sound like it's fun to read, but it's fun to read. The characters are all anthropomorphic animals, and there's a lot of really, really fun cartooning in it. People walking around on stilts that are meant to represent cars. It's just a very weird book, but like weird in, I talk about this in my classes too, where like a lot of times people use weird to mean like wacky. Winston Churchill fighting vampires on the moon. It's so weird. That's not really, that's not weird. That's just wacky. This is a book that's weird as in like unexpected and disquieting. It really does things that you didn't see coming and that they crawl under your skin and stick with you.
It really sets into your mind, and you find yourself coming back to it and thinking about it and thinking about it.
Yeah, I was still juggling. Why are they on stilts? And then a big moment happens in the book, and I'm like, yeah, but the stilts.
Yes, that's a feature of Jason, is that like he just has like stuff in there that's never explained. I mean, yeah, no, if you don't go into this book thinking like the big last scene reveal is going to be about the stilts, because it will not be.
I had a hard time with the stilts at first. It wasn't until I think the scene where he's throwing the rock. He throws the rock, and I'm like, wait a second. Oh, it's like a windshield. All right, fair enough. And that's the thing about Jason. And you're absolutely right that there's a lot of symbolism in his particular books. There's a lot of things that are left unsaid. He is a type of writer, cartoonist that rewards you for rereadings. Like, for example, I'm really glad that you picked this one because I think it's only like 68 pages long. And to be honest, there are a couple pages that are actually nothing but blank white squares. But that is, again, a feature, not a bug. Like, it's very, very important that you get those blank white squares. And it's why these types of books are great to read over and over and over again, because you get a little bit more out of every single time. Now, as I said, on Last Comic Shop, we do spoilers for some of the things that happen in these particular books. We're hoping to generate some interest in you going out and picking it up yourself. I wanted to quickly just ask Paul, I mean, Jason's got a lot of books out there. Why this one? Do you feel like you wanted to read on the show?
I love a lot of his books. I think I Killed Adolf Hitler is maybe probably my second favorite thing of his. But this one really, it really just, like I said, it just got under my skin. And I do think it has, like, all this stuff has depth. I think this one has just such extraordinary storytelling depth. Every time I read it, like I said, I discover new things. And again, like, it's deceptively simple is the way I would describe it. You were talking about the scene where they're throwing rocks at the guys on stilts, and it's meant to be like, throwing rocks at cars. And there's a major collision, like all the stilts come together and they fall. And it's funny, like, it's that would not be funny if it was cars. You know what I mean? Like, if it actually threw a rock at a windshield on one, like four cars, like these dads driving home from work, all smashing into each other on the road, that would be awful. But that's what it is meant to represent. But like when they do that, like that's a very dangerous thing for them to do, to like be throwing rocks at these cars / stilts, and then they cause a huge accident and they run away laughing. And then our main character, I believe he's the one that throws the rock, and he has a friend who does not throw the rock. And then the scene directly after that, his friend leaves, and our main character goes and peeks in someone's apartment window and sees like a nudie calendar on the wall. So that's 2 scenes in a row where he is doing dangerous things. He's taking risks. And then the scene after that is him doing a really dangerous thing and encouraging his friend to do it as well. And his friend's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then later on, his friend does do it, and there are disastrous consequences because of it. So like what seems like just, random scenes of these kids is actually like that's the kind of thing, like every time I look at it, I'm like, he's like showing that this kid is the one who's willing to take risks and be dangerous, and he pushes his friend into doing the same, even though he's clearly not
right.
wanting. He's not that kind of kid.
Yeah.
And that's where the title of the book actually comes from. Those last 2 panels before his friend has the accident, and before that, it was, as you said, very much slice of life. And I was reading, I'm like, where is this going? Where is this book going? And then that hit, and I was, whoa. I don't think I recovered for another 10, 15, 20 pages, because right after that, then you have this giant jump in time. There are a lot of jump cuts in the book.
The sneeze.
Yeah.
Or one character sneezes and bends down and then comes back up, 10, 15 years later, whatever it is.
Yes, I love that one, and the one that really just amazed me and destroyed me is when he's like an old, he's probably middle aged, probably like around my age, in my 40s, and he is at his apartment. He has a date over, and the date is looking at the photos on his dresser, as you will, and she says, "John, who is that?" And he comes over and looks at the photo, and he says, "That's me." And she doesn't say, "When was this taken?" She says, "When will these photos be taken?" And he says, "In about 15 to 20 years." And then we see another jump ahead in time. So I love that notion. He has photos from his future in his apartment, which, like, this is not like a time travel story, but
right.
Because this is how it feels to him. His entire life after this horrible accident is just one long blur of existing and underachieving.
Right. Making widgets in a factory, even though he didn't say he ever wanted to do that. I want to go back to the incident that happens and the whole notion of the title of Hey, Wait. What made it for me is kind of like the buildup. There's definitely a buildup. They're sitting there on, a bed. He's talking about some girl. All of a sudden he starts talking about Batman and how Neil Adams is a great artist, which I thought was awesome, because I had the conversation with J.A. We were childhood buddies, and we had those kind of conversations where you're talking about something else, but then it gets a little bit awkward, so you go back to talking about comic books because it's an easier segue back into something that's not so serious. But then he says like, oh, we need to have a Batman club. And he's like, oh, we do need to have a Batman club. We shouldn't invite everybody though. They have to do this thing. They have to do this thing. And look, I'll do it. And you can tell the hesitation in his friend. Like, you know, the Jason does a really good job after that of showing how they're not really talking to each other. Like one is listening to music, and it's like building up, and then finally the friend's like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it. And that very last second he goes, hey, wait. And it's maybe that hey, wait, that maybe distracts his friend for a split second, whatever happens to be. Maybe the friend could have done it had he not said something, had he not doubled down on this dangerous thing by providing hesitation at the last second. I do
think that's very much the intention, yeah. And there's like an anecdote from my own life that like probably about 20 years ago now. I was driving here in Indiana on like a rural road that was very, very icy. It was right after a snowstorm. And the passenger I had with me, he went, hey, be careful with these roads. And right as he said that, like my body tensed up at it, and I ended up sliding on the ice and like slid into like a head-on collision with a car coming from the other direction, and like totaled my car. And you know, we were both fine. It could have been a lot worse if everyone was fine. But like he definitely was him saying that like, so when I read this book, I was like, oh man, that is just so realistic as well. And I'm thinking like how guilty he has felt about that ever since. We were fine.
Yeah, it's one twist of one thing that could. You mentioned how deceptively simple this book is, and that's absolutely true. And there's so many little slice of life moments, like Andy was saying, where it's like we've all had that conversations about, you know, well, Neil Adams is the best Batman artist, you know, or you know, the friends passing notes in class, and the kids just, you know, up to their mischief. But then you marry that with the weirdness of this book. Right after the one friend does the tree limb jump, they're having those moments of awkwardness. You know, he's walking by and just Death rides by on a bicycle and waves hello. Yeah. Like, I'm going to see you in a little bit. Like, it's just chilling, right? You know, I'm just like you guys, where there's so many moments in here where it's, you feel like they're relatable. You know, even the sneeze, and it's 10 years later that we were just talking about, you know, 2014. You were writing this book, and now it's 11 years later. Like, oh my goodness, where did it go? You sneezed, and it's gone. Those deceptively simple moments, that's what great comic booking, you know, is happening in that deceptive simplicity. You know, it's so relatable. We always talk about the Scott McCloud stuff, and, you know, the simpler the lines, the more people can relate to what's going on. And I can't help but feel like so much of that is in play here.
I'm glad you mentioned Death. That's one of the things I love about this book, is that in a different cartoonist hands, you probably would have seen Death show up like after the actual death in the book. But in this book, Death is hanging around in the background from the beginning. He's just always there, as he always is there in all of our lives. And that's fascinating to me, that choice just adds such an eerie element to the whole thing. The way Jeff is drawn is just honestly terrifying. I mean, it's like,
it is.
Yeah, it's.
And this is not an art style that you would associate with horror. but
the fact that it's cartooning, it actually makes it even more unsettling. As you said, crawl under your skin and just kind of sit there. Speaking of that, you know, again, there's a great scene in this book that really grabbed me, refused to let go, and it's this last scene where this guy that's lived this mediocre life ever since the passing of his friend, you know, he's sitting there at a table with Death, and he says, hey, I'm not a bad person. You know, I've carried a lot of this grief around with me, you know, and this shame and this guilt over what happened with my friend. And he just wanted to say, and Death's like, you know what, I'll give you some. And I just thought, boy, howdy, that and I'm not going to say what happens, but for those folks that we hope that you go and read, hey, wait, let me just tell you that the ending is just as good as anything else that is in this book. I think that Jason writes a wonderful tale from beginning to end. It's great cartooning and it's great storytelling. So I'm really happy that you picked this, Paul.
That page, it was a one scene page that you're talking about. I've showed that page to some of my classes, like to make, not just a spoiler, but like to make a point about the cartooning, which I won't get into because it would tell you what's on the page. But every time I like bring it up on my screen share in my classes, you can just like feel like the breath go out of the room over Zoom. Like I can see all their faces, and every time they're always just like, "Oh shit!" Like every one of them, just from looking at that one page.
What makes it a page you can feel without spoiling too much, or is that an impossible ask?
Right. I think it's difficult. I don't want to say. Hold on.
I think back as a comic fan to the Sal Buscema run on Spectacular Spider-Man, which I don't know if you've ever read or not, but he would have these 9-panel grids where it's like 9 panels that were all the same, and then you'd have the change in that last panel. And as like a 10-year-old, I'm like, this is so cheap. But at the same time, those Sal Buscema stories are the ones that I would go back to and reading over and over and over again, like because they were the best ones.
The thing that I talk about in my classes about that page is the pacing, and it's when I'm talking about a grid can be used to extraordinary effect for pacing just by like changing little things up here and there, and it's a relentless moment. I would say it's kind of a slow scene. You know, like a grid is often pretty fast. I think because of the nature of this, like it really invites you to take your time with each panel, and then the ending is just absolutely devastating in the implications and in how much it leaves you, the reader, to decide for yourself what it means.
Oh man, you mean that's on me? Because it's haunting.
Sorry. It's on you.
Damn it!
As a perspective, you know what I mean? but I think for me personally, I feel like the author's perspective on the book is not the final say, that once you release a book into the public, it's no longer yours. So if you don't explicitly say what a moment means, which I think if you're a good writer, you almost never do, a reader's interpretation is as valid as the author's. That's a somewhat controversial statement in certain circles, but it's how I feel.
Yeah, and I think especially this book, with being that it's so sparsely, the dialogue is so sparse and it's so, deceptively simply drawn, it leads you as the reader to invest a lot of your own history and your own ideas and experiences on top of what you're seeing. And as you said, some of those panels and pages, you can fall into them almost. Yeah. And 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes later, you're on the same page. And then jump, and, it's 10 years later. I think the reading experience of the book is very much like the book itself, how it's written.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
We'll be right back with more of The Last Comic Shop. We're going to wrap it up with Paul. We're also got recommendations for other books that you might want to check out. So stay tuned for more of The Last Comic Shop right after this.
This message is from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Veterans, do you want military history and your stories of service preserved? The Library of Congress Veterans History Project collects, preserves, and makes accessible the first-hand accounts of veterans who served from World War I through today. Make your story heard. To learn more and become involved, visit loc.gov/vets.
Hi everyone, I'm Nerd Bomber.
And I'm Tactic, and we're two of the hosts of the Online Warriors podcast.
Our podcast started as a way for three best friends to keep in touch and discuss their nerdy hobbies like movies, gaming, tech, and more.
Since then, we've grown into a great community. Every Wednesday, we chat about the latest nerdy news before getting hands-on with our weekly nerdy adventures.
And don't forget our high-stakes trivia game. Come join the fun at onlinewarriorspodcast.com and every major podcast platform. And now, back to the show.
All right, we're back with more of The Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for recommendations. Yes, that's that time of every single show where, in addition to checking out some of Paul Allor's fantastic work on things like G.I. Joe and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Marvel Rivals, as well as checking out Hey Wait by Jason, which we just talked about with Paul, here are some other books that we hope that you check out at your local comic book shop today. We're going to go ahead and start off with J.A. Scott. So, J.A., what do you got for us this week?
I'm going to recommend another graphic novel out of Europe. This is Years of the Elephant by the Belgian comic artist Willy Linthot. And this was published in 2009. It's a graphic novel that he wrote and drew based on his experience of his son committing suicide and how he goes and channels the grief of that. And one thing that really struck me, not only how him and his wife in the graphic novel deal with the grief of this and go through all the different stages, how it's drawn. He drew it in pencil and he didn't ink it. So each page, all the panels, still you can see a lot of the initial marks, and then he went back and made, the final drawings a little bit heavier, but never inked it. And when questioned about this, why he hadn't inked and finished the book, he said it represents his son's life, which is also unfinished.
Oh my.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
I think that's going to be a year of JA pick coming up here, maybe at some point before the end of 2025. So stick around for the last comic shop to hear more about that book. My recommendation this week is a little less heavy, but kind of deals with some of the same things that Paul does fantastically well, by the way. And that is write great licensed comic books. And so this week I read a great licensed comic about one of my favorite franchises, and that's the Planet of the Apes franchise, especially early Planet of the Apes. My favorite two movies out of that whole franchise are the first two, Planet of the Apes and then Beneath the Planet of the Apes. I actually like Beneath the Planet of the Apes the most. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. And so when I saw the title, Beware of the Planet of the Apes, and I saw Cornelius and Zero on the cover, I could not help but go ahead and just pick this up. It's done by Mark Guggenheim, writing with fantastic art by Alvaro Lopez. And actually, it's got some other folks on writing and art as well, because excerpts from the original Adventures of the Planet of the Apes series that Marvel did shortly after the movies became popular in the 1970s, written by Doug Monk and drawn by George Tuska and Alfredo Alcala, who we love here at the Last Comic Shop.
Were those the magazines?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Very cool.
Basically, they intersplice some of those panels, especially the movie adaptation of Beneath the Planet of the Apes within this story, because it really is a tale that happens before the original Planet of the Apes, before Taylor lands on the planet. You have Zira and Cornelius looking for Zira's nephew, Lucius, who just disappears one day when he's out trying to protect Nova, who you may know ends up being Taylor's main squeeze. We're introduced to a whole new society of mutants, not just the ones that had the almighty bomb. And then we're also introduced to an entire city of militant guerrillas that were way outside of Ape City. And it just expands the whole, universe and what you really thought was going on this Earth long before Planet of the Apes starts. And what I love about this is it doesn't actually interfere with any of the plot of those original two movies. At the end of this story, not to tell you anything, but it kind of wraps up in a way that you're like, oh, okay, all right, that's fine. Like, this doesn't interfere with any of the pre-existing continuity. This is kind of neat. So I would highly recommend that if you're a fan of the Planet of the Apes movies, especially the older ones, pick up Beware the Planet of the Apes today. All right, Chad, why don't you let us know what your recommendation is this week?
Okay, so I'm going to go, this is the easy way out here. But I was telling Paul prior to his recommending, hey, wait, I'd never read a comic by Jason. And so I'm grateful to be exposed to something new, and I keep going back to the deceptively simple part and how relatable that makes things. And so my recommendation is going to be I Killed Adolf Hitler by Jason. I read that. I read The Isle of 100,000 Graves, all kinds of stuff. In the I Killed Adolf Hitler, it's a time travel story. But it reminded me of my wonderful wife, where we had dated and then stopped dating for a period of time in college, and then realized, it's not the person you can live with, it's the person you can't live without, and rectified our situations and got back together. But in the interim, there's a scene in here where someone's like, yeah, that terrible thing, that was me. And it's like, oh yeah, we did a lot of terrible stuff to each other, but it turns out, like, I don't know, it was just so relatable. You read these, and I borrowed these from our local library. So if you can't find these in comic shops, don't be afraid to check out some of those digital library offerings. But it was just so relatable to my own personal experience. And whether that's me just projecting on to the stuff that Jason's putting out there, if those were the intention of the original art, I don't know. But it affected me as a reader, and so I appreciate that. So yeah, I Killed Adolf Hitler. It's a time travel story, years in the making, and it manages to tug at the heartstrings, even despite all the sci-fi crazy wackiness that is entailed. So check it out.
All right, Paul, bring us home. What's your recommendation this week?
I have two recommendations, one very brief one and then my actual one. The very brief one is we've talked a lot about my licensed work. I also write creator-owned work, and if you have enjoyed my stuff on G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles, and anything else, I would strongly recommend you check it out. I won't go through all of it, but if you go to my website, Paul Allor, that's ALLOR.com, and then you can go straight to it with /writer, because I have like a section for my writing, lettering, education, editing. Then at the top of that page is a list of my creator-owned work with covers of all of them. You can click on them and read a little bit more about them and check out anything that sounds good. So that's my first recommendation is stuff I wrote. My actual recommendation is a graphic novel by Will McFell, a Scottish cartoonist who does like the cartoons for The New Yorker, those little one-panel things with a funny gag underneath. He's really good at those. But he did this extraordinary book called In, I-N, and it's very different from Hey Wait, but I think people who enjoyed Hey Wait, there will be a lot of overlap. You'll enjoy this too. It is black and white art, and it's about a guy who is desperately trying to learn how to connect with his fellow humanity because he has never been able to do that. So he goes and he sits in bars and coffee shops and tries to order the things that he thinks he should order, tries to act like he thinks a normal person should act, and just very slowly starts to learn how to actually be an authentic person. There's a lovely scene early on where he has a plumber at his apartment fixing his toilet, and he like opens up to the plumber in a way that he's never like really opened up to anyone. Just he tries to do. He's like, "What the heck? Why don't I just try this?" And says something like kind of personal. I think what he says is like, I've always had a hard time talking to people like you. And the plumber's like, "Yeah, I get that. I have a hard time talking to people like you too." And it's just like this revelatory moment for him. You know what I mean? That like this small moment of connection. And what Will McFell does with it, cartooning wise, in those moments where he has these revelations, is really gorgeous, and I won't spoil it for you. I also won't spoil that basically there's something that happens probably a third of the way through the book that sort of both damages his ability to connect and also sort of speeds up his learning. And it's a really wonderful, beautiful, sad, lovely book.
I'm going to have to check that one out. I know that we've been all writing down some notes furiously here, Paul.
Awesome.
And we hope that you check out more of The Last Comic Shop in future, and you can do that by going out to www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, rate, reviewing, and subscribing, so that not only can you listen to upcoming episodes, but if you'd ever like to check out any of our past episodes featuring wonderful interviews, such as the one we've had with Paul today, you can go ahead and check those out. All of our episodes are evergreen, and we hope that you'll listen to one and find a great comic, such as Hey Wait, which we've discovered with Paul this week.
And while we might be the Last Comic Shop podcast, we don't want to be the last comic shop. So we encourage everybody to get out there, check out some of those things you can find on Paul's website amongst his library, including some of the stuff we gushed about here today, like G.I. Joe World Strike, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Nation. I don't think we got to talk about the animated adventures or Turtles versus Street Fighter or Marvel Rivals. There's a ton of great stuff there. But also books like Hey Wait, books like Years of the Elephant, or Beware the Planet of the Apes, or I Killed Adolf Hitler by Jason, or Will McFell's In. All of that and more potentially waits for you at your local comic shop. So make sure you check those things out today. And then if you want links for some of the things we're talking about, you can always go back to our website, www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, where they can find links to socials. And what else, J.A.?
We have a link to our merch store where you can get t-shirts, tote bags, coffee mugs. We don't have a shirt that says Obey Cobra, unfortunately, because we don't want to get sued. But we do have a shirt that says The Last Comic Shop Podcast. So
I do have an Obey Cobra shirt, just for the record.
Very nice.
You also have a website, Paul. So real quickly, why don't you tell everybody where they can find your fantastic work every single day?
Yes, paulallor.com. Again, it's ALLOR, like all or nothing.
There you go. And where are you on the social media? So if people want to interact with you there?
I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky at Paul Allor, though I've been using Twitter less recently for the reasons. I'm also on Instagram. I think it's paul.allor over there, and those are my main social media haunts.
Thank you so much for coming on. This conversation was insightful. There were tons of great recommendations. I feel like I learned things. Thank you once again, Paul Allor, for coming on to the show. We hope you come back to the Last Comic Shop. And Andy, take us home.
Yeah, and we hope that everybody comes back to the Last Comic Shop next week. Until then, I was the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Jay Scott and Chad Smith, as well as the fantastic Paul Allor. And we hope that you stay safe. Stay cool, because it is the summertime, and find yourself a pool, jump on in, and always remember, if you happen to be a claustrophobic astronaut, don't worry, you just need some space.
That's gotta be tough because they're in those tiny capsules.
Yeah,
In space, no one can hear you groan.
It's actually pronounced Allor.
Comic Shop Podcast was a 2025 Black Angus production.